The most powerful human being who has ever lived cannot move. For 10,000 years, he has sat in agony no mortal mind could survive for even seconds. His body is rotting, and every single day 1,000 psykers are sacrificed just to keep him conscious. Because if the Emperor dies, the Imperium goes dark. Horus wounded him so deeply that even a Perpetual could not heal. But most videos stop there, and that is the smallest part of this story. Because the real question is not why he has not healed. It is why he can never be allowed to, and what 10,000 years on that throne has actually done to the being sitting on it. The Golden Throne was never keeping him alive, it was trapping him. And after 10 millennia, whatever is sitting on that throne may not even be the Emperor anymore. The Golden Throne was not built for this. It was not designed as life support, nor constructed to sustain a human body across centuries. It was the centerpiece of the Emperor's most ambitious secret project, an attempt to give humanity safe, permanent passage through the webway, bypassing the warp entirely, and a future where the Imperium would never again depend on navigators, or lose ships to the void between stars. The throne was the access point, the machine at the center of something far larger. But it was never meant to hold a man indefinitely. And after 10,000 years, that shows in every way imaginable. His physical body has been decaying for 10,000 years. The Mechanicus intervene constantly, not to restore him, but to manage the deterioration and slow what cannot be stopped. What sits on that throne is less a body now than a system being maintained at the edge of total collapse, indefinitely by the most technically sophisticated organization in the Imperium. And yet, the Astronomican still burns. Every navigator who crosses the galaxy does so because one mind, in continuous agony beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra, broadcasts a psychic signal powerful enough to be felt across the width of human space. Without it, warp travel becomes a death sentence. Because supply lines collapse, armies cannot move, and the Imperium's million worlds become a million separate silences. 1,000 psykers are brought to the throne every single day, burned out completely just to keep the Emperor conscious enough to maintain that signal. The entire human civilization balances on this single point of suffering. So why doesn't he simply heal? He is a perpetual. Regeneration is literally written into his existence, and beings like him have returned from death itself. But to understand exactly why it is not working, you have to understand what Horus actually did to him aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The Vengeful Spirit, the final confrontation. The specific details of that battle are not what matter here. What matters is what Horus had become. Horus was not simply a traitor Primarch. Horus was a vessel, a single body carrying the unified power of all four Chaos gods simultaneously. The Emperor did not walk into a fight with his son. He walked into direct contact with the warp itself, given flesh and intent and 10,000 years of hatred compressed into one moment. However, the wounds were not just physical trauma. That distinction matters more than anything else in this video. The mechanism is straightforward. A perpetual heals because the soul rebuilds the flesh. But what Horus inflicted weren't wounds to the flesh. They were ruptures in the psychic architecture of the soul itself. The engine that drives regeneration was struck at its source, and the mechanism that was supposed to save him is what was destroyed. But here is what most lore coverage do not cover. When the warp makes sustained contact with a psychic being of sufficient magnitude, it does not only wound them, it begins to change them. And the Emperor has been in continuous, intensive, maximal contact with the warp for 10,000 years, since that moment on the Vengeful Spirit. We will come back to that, because there is a more immediate problem. Even if the soul damage could somehow be repaired tomorrow, getting off the throne was never an option. People imagine the Emperor made a choice, a final sacrifice, a god deciding to suffer so humanity could survive. Discard that idea entirely, because there was no choice. The moment the Emperor was bound to the Golden Throne, leaving it stopped being possible, the machine was never something he merely sat upon. It fused into him completely, became indistinguishable from the system it was consuming. The throne is simply where the plug meets the socket. But to grasp the horror of what it has become, you have to understand what the throne was actually doing before it became a life support system. The Emperor's Webway project was the most ambitious undertaking in human history, because the Webway offered something the Imperium had never been able to guarantee: safe passage between worlds. But if it had succeeded, the Imperium would have become truly sovereign. Everything the Emperor had claimed to be building toward, and then Magnus the Red ended it in a single act. Trying to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, Magnus tore through the psychic wards protecting the project, shattered them completely, with the force of someone who did not stop to consider what those wards were actually containing. The breach opened, and demons began flooding through Webway tunnels that ran directly beneath the Imperial Palace on Terra. The Emperor did not choose to sit on the throne as a sacrifice. He sat because he was the only being in existence with sufficient psychic mass to hold the breach closed, a temporary intervention while the crisis was managed. But that was only the beginning, because the crisis never ended. What began as an emergency became permanent, and for 10,000 years, every fragment of the Emperor's existence has been consumed by a single impossible task: holding reality together beneath Terra while guiding humanity through the warp. There has never been anything left for healing. If he disconnects or dies, the Webway breach beneath Terra tears open again. Demonic forces pour directly into the heart of the Imperium, not from the edges of space, but from underneath the Imperial Palace itself. Simultaneously, the Astronomican goes dark. Every navigator in the galaxy loses the only reliable beacon they can follow mid-transit. And without his psychic mass anchoring the region, the Eye of Terror begins expanding toward Terra. The Imperium does not need the Emperor to be alive. It needs him to never stop. And those are not the same thing. Here's the most quietly brutal fact in the entire setting. The decision that his suffering was an acceptable cost was made long ago. It was made 10,000 years ago by people long dead. No fabricator general, no high lord, and no power left within the Imperium carries the authority to undo it. And even if one did find the courage to ask the question, the mathematics always returns the same answer, and the suffering continues. But while the Imperium keeps him running, the warp has been doing something to him that started the moment Horus's wounds touched his soul. After 10,000 years, it may have already finished. Remember what was established earlier. The warp does not simply wound powerful psychic beings. Sustained exposure to that dimension reshapes them, gradually, continuously, in direct proportion to the intensity and duration of contact. And no psychic being in human history has existed in more continuous warp exposure than the Emperor has for the last 10,000 years. The warp is not a passive void. It is a dimension composed of psychic energy, belief, emotion, fear, and consciousness given form. It responds to thought. It reshapes itself around it, and then it reflects that shaped energy back toward its source. But now consider the source. Every prayer spoken across the Imperium generates psychic energy, trillions of minds across 1,000,000 worlds, directing belief toward a single focal point. That energy enters the warp, reshapes itself around the object of worship, and returns to the thing the belief is aimed at, back toward the throne and to whatever is sitting on it. This is not metaphor. In Warhammer 40K, this is literally how gods are made. However, the Chaos gods themselves were not always what they are. They were created by cumulative psychic output, mortal consciousness, sustained over millennia, generating enough concentrated belief to crystallize something in the warp. Khorne from millennia of violence and rage. Slanesh from the Eldari's own excess, turned inward until it became a god and destroyed them. The process is documented and the mechanism is understood. The Emperor is experiencing that same process from the inside. He is conscious, unable to stop and speak against it, able only to absorb it, because the throne gives him no capacity to do anything else. But here is where it becomes something more than a tragedy of circumstance. The Emperor spent 20,000 years building the imperial truth. No gods, no superstition. Humanity sovereign over its own existence, advancing on its own strength, he banned religion across the Imperium and executed those who preached otherwise. The entire philosophical foundation of his project was the insistence that humanity did not need to worship anything, least of all him. Yet, within 2 centuries of his internment on the throne, the ecclesiarchy existed. Within a millennium, the imperial cult had spread to every corner of human space, and for 9,000 years since, The single most concentrated act of collective human consciousness in history has been the worship of the Emperor as a living god, aimed continuously at the throne he cannot leave. The man who wanted humanity to stop worshipping gods became the most worshipped figure in history. Every prayer feeds the process. Every act of faith reinforces it. And the Emperor cannot stop it. He cannot correct the civilization that replaced the imperial truth with worship of his image. He can only absorb what they have made him into. What remains may be vast, but it is not him. It is what 8 billion people, and then 80 billion, and then trillions across 1 million worlds believed him to be continuously for 100 centuries. The Imperium has been praying to something it created, and it has no idea. The Emperor's entire vision rested on one idea: no gods, no superstition, humanity standing on its own strength. He spent thousands of years trying to build that future. Instead, he became the most worshipped being in human history. Every prayer, every crusade, every dying soldier calling his name turned him into the very thing he tried to destroy. Now, the Imperium no longer keeps him alive out of faith or loyalty, but because there is no alternative. The Golden Throne has become the foundation of the entire civilization, holding back catastrophe, guiding humanity through the stars, and preventing the Imperium from collapsing. Which is why the Emperor cannot simply rise or save himself. Too much now depends on the throne remaining exactly as it is. If he fails, the Imperium fails with him. And that is the final tragedy of the Emperor. If this video gave you something the others didn't, membership keeps this channel making content like it. 2 tiers, both linked below. The Inquisition thanks you. For the Emperor.